Welcome, everyone. It's 6:11 on Monday night. You're listening to the 139th installment of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour on www.hamiltonradio.net Channel 2. I'm your host, Greg Rapport. I'm the founder and executive director of Age Out Angels. We're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. Age Out Angels provides one-to-one mentors to vulnerable youth for the purpose of coordinating the care and services that they need to survive. We try to help young people avoid some of the horrible pitfalls that they're likely to face when they don't have a proper safety net. And this program is brought to you every week at the same time, courtesy of Doc G, William Saunders, Ruben Rodriguez, and all the fine people here at Hamilton Radio who allow us to use this airtime. Ruben is on the big board tonight. Robin is producing from the dining room. So good to have both of you here. And so good to have all of you at home listening to us tonight. We thank you so much for tuning in. We put together what I hope you'll find to be an insightful and compelling view of the child welfare system and related issues that improve our communities. So get ready, because tonight, two very, very special guests. First, we have Angela Quijada-Banks, and Angela is the author of the Black Foster Youth Handbook. And along with Angela, we have Lynne Azarchi. She's the executive director of Kids Bridge, which is recognized as the anti-bullying company in our county. And she also wrote a book called The Empathy Advantage. Two people who are expert in their respective areas. We're going to learn a lot from them. Also tonight, it's still Domestic Violence Awareness Month. In fact, we're going to start actually with a horrible story from Largo, Florida that gives an insight into childhood trauma suffered at the hands of the caregiver and how this is going on for generation after generation. And you know, if you need assistance or want to talk to someone about domestic violence, there's a phone number, 1-866-331-9474, to speak with a trained peer advocate. So everybody get ready for 52 minutes of reality. And hopefully when it's over, you'll be a little richer for having done so. Stay with Hamilton Radio all night for a combination of great music and talk. Rome Brothers on after me. Big day in the NFL yesterday, so stick around for the Rome Brothers talking sports. Now, please take a moment if you're looking at us on Facebook and hit that share button, or email your address book and tell everyone to go to www.hamiltonradio.net Channel 2. Tell everyone in your world what we're talking about, because what you're going to hear applies to every geographic region, especially where you live, and it needs to be shared. This is good information we bring to you every week. In fact, next week, October 26th, Jennifer Pokempner from the Juvenile Law Center in Philadelphia will be joining us, and on and on and on. One great show after another, so don't keep this private to yourself. And while you're going to www.hamiltonradio.net, when you reach that homepage, you will find a lovely, I believe it's yellow, donate button. And if you would be so kind to hit that donate button and make a donation to Hamilton Radio. We're trying to keep us on the air. We're trying to keep the station alive. This radio station does so many things for the community. It's ridiculous. Whenever they're called upon, they are always there. So if you can go to www.hamiltonradio.net, hit the donate button and give whatever you can. These are tough times for media broadcasting agencies and nonprofit organizations. And so if it's a tough time for you, we understand. But if you're doing okay, help us out. And don't keep this private to yourself. Tell your friends. There's a whole generation of youth being forgotten, and caring people like you and me can't sit still while that happens. For our unchild welfare system and other related community services, because this is where you come to get the whole truth. And I promise what you will hear tonight cannot be found on the nightly news. You are welcome to be a part of the show. Simply write to us on the comments field in Facebook, or if you're extra brave, give us a call at 609-807-2492. Again, that number is 609-807-2492. And I always remind people at the top of every show, if you are in crisis, if you're feeling like you're walking up to the edge of a cliff, then I want you to do me one favor, please, and make one phone call. And that one phone call is to a free mental health hotline. These resources are available to anyone at any time. They exist to help you connect with the right support when you need help. If you are thinking about harming yourself, and you may hear some things tonight that trigger that reaction in you, I don't want you to keep that inside. I want you to pick up the phone and call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273 8255. I want to tell all my friends in New Jersey about the Bridges to Employment program. If you or someone you know is currently in foster care or aged out, up to age 24, doesn't have a job, not in school, this is the perfect program for you. We'll provide all the supports you need to get your high school equivalency if you need it. And if you don't need it, but you just need some brush-up skills, we'll get you that as well and get you moving towards a career where you can live independently. This is the best, most comprehensive program I've ever seen. I believe it comes on once in a lifetime, and not only is it all free, but you can actually earn up to $1,000 in incentives as you progress on your journey to success. Call 609-306-0821 for more information, or email me directly at greg@ageoutangels.org. Before we get to our guest, story from the Tampa Bay Times shook the child welfare world this week. Jordan Bellevue, 2 years old, his mother was sentenced to 50 years after being convicted of his murder. A fabulous story written by Jack Evans. In 2018, Sharice Stinson, that's the mother's name, Sharice Stinson, told Largo police her son had been abducted, sparking a massive search. Now she has pleaded guilty in his death. They interviewed the father for this, Jordan Bellevue Sr. He's just sort of emotionally wrecked. And he didn't want to go to court during the day of the sentencing because he didn't want to cause a scene. And he already knew the terms of the plea deal that Sharice Stinson agreed to for killing their 2-year-old son, Jordan Bellevue Jr. The mother was 23 years old. She would spend 50 years, up to 50 years in prison, with credit for more than 2 years already served in jail. This crime actually happened 2 years ago. And the father didn't go to court that day, besides not wanting to create a scene, but because he didn't think that was enough. More than 2 years ago, Stinson told police she accepted a ride from a man who knocked her unconscious and abducted the child. An Amber Alert and multi-day manhunt ensued. The search ended in the woods behind a Largo baseball field where the boy's body was found on September 4th, 2018. Stinson soon admitted to police that she'd made up the abduction story. What really happened, she said, was that she hit Jordan in a moment of frustration and his head hit a wall and he started having seizures. She left him for dead in the woods. An autopsy said he suffered a skull fracture, a leg fracture, and bleeding beneath his scalp. Cause of death was blunt trauma. She was charged with first-degree murder and making a false report to law enforcement. On Tuesday, she pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of second-degree murder and to the false report charge. In addition to prison, she'll owe more than $28,000 in court and investigative costs. And my side editorial note there is that money will never be paid. Both Stinson and the child spent much of their lives entangled with the child welfare system. Now, remember, this young man was only 2 years old at the time of his murder. In the wake of the killing, the case became a public indictment of that system's failure to provide stability or spot red flags. And here's where the red flag really gets tricky, because what we're talking about here is multi-generational abuse. Stinson grew up in flux, living at one time in a motel, at another in a home without electricity. The latter resulted in a negligent complaint that had her temporarily removed from her mother's custody. Later, she spent a chunk of her teen years in a group home where she found some measure of stability, but also showed anger and obsession that some close to her felt were signs of an undiagnosed mental illness. Then before she was out of her teens, the home closed. Now, none of her unstable upbringing excuses her for killing her own child. But neither can Jordan's death be understood without that context. The point being that this is going on generation after generation. According to Fazia Brown, who worked at the groom home when Stinson lived there, there were signs. And let's not ignore the signs. Now, Jordan, the child, was placed in foster care when he was 6 months old. Police had been called to his parents' house. And it was determined that it was not a safe environment for him. He lived for more than a year with foster parents who, after his death, remembered him as joyful and mischievous. They nicknamed him Mr. Chuckles. And they declined to comment for the story. Now, there's a lot more that goes into this. And if you'd like to hear it, you got to stick around for my final words, because right now, I would like to say hello to my guests. starting with Angela Quijada-Banks, author of the Black Foster Youth Handbook.
Yeah.
That she's holding up right now. And Angela, welcome to the show.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for having me. And I'm just really excited to dive into very important topics today.
Want to hear all about your story, but first, let's say hi to Lynne Azarchi. Lynne, this is your 27th time on the program. You are the author of The Empathy Advantage. We have to get you a blazer. And my first question.
I want to go watch.
My first question goes to you, especially after the story that I just read half of. People have real opinions. They hate the mother. They hate the system. They hate. When you wrote this book, were you feeling that in a broad cultural sense, we have lost our sense of empathy, or did we ever have it?
So that story just makes me so sad. I mean, there's just so many wounded and damaged people, adults, children, grandparents. And then with COVID, I think all these challenges have exacerbated where we are as a society, as a culture. So I'm director, as you know, of the Kids Bridge Tolerance Center. And about 15 years ago, I realized that empathy was really job one. It was the foundation. It's where you started to learn about yourself and others. So to circle back what you said about what's going on today, I would like people to think about investing in their children and in other people's children. And those kids, of course, how about a little bit more empathy for the children in the foster system, whether they're children or teens. So that, and I'll talk more later about starting with yourself, self-compassion for yourself, and then building on that to have empathy for others. So I believe we do as a society, especially today, have an empathy deficit as a society, and just quick little fun things you can do in your classroom, in your home to raise the level. So what's the bottom line? Empathy can be taught. You're born with a certain amount. Empathy can be taught. It can be learned and inculcated in your children or your students, and you can do it. You as a parent, you don't have to be an Einstein. It's very easy and it's fun to do, and we need it.
Fantastic. We do indeed. So Angela, what drove you to write the Black Foster? Like, is it different from the white foster youth handbook? Is that?
I love that question. And so I titled the book The Black Foster Youth Handbook because it's 50 plus lessons that I learned to successfully age out of foster care and holistically heal. And so my experience is, it includes racism, and other things. So that is why I named it that. But the reason behind it is more so my experience as well as other young people that have gone through the foster care system, and understanding that we don't have to, drown in our trauma, regardless of your race or ethnicity. We don't have to drown in our trauma. We don't have to, after something horrible or multiple things. For me, I used to label my story as like the series of unfortunate events part 2, because I just felt like I was always in a situation. There was always something horrible happening to me. And it wasn't until I realized that I not necessarily was the blame of it, but I could take control of my life. I could take control of my circumstances, and we all can. And it doesn't matter if you've never had trauma or if you have had trauma, you can do it. And so from my personal experience and listening to the experiences of other young people across the nation, as I've traveled and spoken with congressional members to get legislation passed into law, and piloted a mentoring program in North Carolina for young people in foster care, I learned that we have a lot of these narratives that we repeat to ourselves, and sometimes some of those narratives were helpful during times of survival when we really needed to get through something. But now, as we get older, it's important to shed a lot of those narratives. It's important to shed a lot of those ideas that we once needed in order to sustain us. And so that's part of the reason why I did that. And specifically this year, it was in the beginning of this year that I started it and started writing it. And as the pandemic started, I realized that I really needed to get this book out. I wasn't going to wait a year or 2 years. I started back in February and I was like, I'm going to have this done by July. And I had it edited and then it was released in September. So I knew because of the experiences that young people are going through, especially now with homelessness and not really being able to age out of foster care successfully at all, in contrary to my own personal story of not being able to age out successfully, but seeing how those statistics have risen, especially this year, I realized that I couldn't put it off or be like, well, I want to add this thing. I realized that it needed to be here now. And so 400 pages later, it's here.
Well, I'm glad it is. You know, I'm picking up on that point about changing the narrative. I have to tell you, I spent the morning talking to a young lady who has had a very hard life. She's all of 18 years old, and what she's gone through is certainly way more than I believe I could personally cope with. That's the life that she's had. But now, at this moment in time, right? At this moment in time, 18 years old, we call it the division, the foster care system in New Jersey. The division would get her an apartment. They would make sure she has food to eat, clothing to wear, and even a stipend, every month. She can get that until she's 21 years old, and she can get all the free education until she's 21. So changing the narrative is the problem, because this poor kid has been in survival mode for so many years, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, to get her to change, and she's fighting us. She's fighting a tooth and nail. And all we're trying to say is, look, everybody loves you. Sorry. Sometimes it goes that way too. But boy, getting that narrative changed is so hard. And Lynne, I assume that one of the keys to doing that is to have feelings, not just for yourself, but for the people who are around you.
So most people, I think, can't advocate and have empathy for other people till they do that for themselves. So in the olden days, we would raise our children with self-esteem and, build their self-esteem. But in my book, and what I've learned, I push that concept to the side. Self-compassion for yourself. Kidsbridge has educated more than 30,000 children in the Tolerance Center and remote programs. And what I find is still children have no hope. Children are beating themselves up. Children feel they have to be perfect. Children are bullied, and they don't realize that thousands and millions of other children are bullied. And then for children in the foster care system, I would say, they feel, different and segregated. But there's just really commonalities between, I think, all children in our country. So, starting with self-compassion, that you can feel empathy for others, and then ultimately acting for others. In my experience, I don't see the foster system COVID is overwhelming now, but when COVID's gone, I don't see children in the system on anyone's radar. And it needs more visibility and PR. And the way to that, I think, is empathy. Walk in the shoes, of a foster child in the system or one that ages out. I think empathy can really get, the feelings for a foster child more, in the vernacular or in the national conversation. We can do a better job of that.
Absolutely. And talking about walking in the shoes of, I participated in a simulation at one point, and they gave us each, roles to play. And mine was, I had just gotten out of jail, and my pretend wife was drug addicted, and so now live day to day, right? And what you described, Angela, I'll get it right. What you described before about how the stress, it just piles up. Every day it's something new, or twice a day, or 3 times a day. Right. When I experienced that in the simulation, and it was just a simulation. At the end of it all, we were all going to have coffee and cake, you know? But what I experienced in that simulation was just an immediate rise of blood pressure. And wow, people are writing in. Cendric Wiley says, "Go Angela." I don't know if you know who that is or not, but whoever it is thinks you're pretty cool. And a lot of viewers are agreeing with Lynne. Yeah. Lynne, how do you see getting the empathy message to the mainstream?
So I'm sorry to tell you that, with COVID, stress and anxiety are rising for everybody, for parents, for caregivers, for grandparents, for teachers, for kids. The stress and anxiety of just everything is different and harder, and isolation and depression. My wish is more strategic and to invest in our children. So can we invest? I think we've invested in the past trying to inculcate empathy in adults, but I would say let's start with the children. Attitudes, bullying, and racism start at, let me ask you guys, when do you think all these us versus them kind of concepts start and bullying starts? How old are kids?
I guess pretty young. I mean, I think back in my own life, and I remember those things at the age of 5, 6 years old. It might, part of my earliest memory bank is, part of that.
All right, so go back further. So this stuff starts at 3. So what if our society invested in our children holistically and consistently, that we teach them alike and different, diversity appreciation, appreciating differences, walking in the shoes of a foster child. We need to do that better. So my money is on investing in the children, teaching parents, which is what my book is about. It's easy. They can do it. Teachers can do it better. Walking in the shoes of others. We're all human beings. And I think that's a springboard. Teaching empathy enhances high schoolers, better people skills, better interpersonal skills. So, what's not to like? So my shift on my soapbox is really to invest in our children, to teach them empathy, compassion, kindness, and respect. Many times you'll laugh in the Tolerance Center. I have teachers or chaperones come up to me and they say, "Do you have a tolerance center for adults?" So we need tolerance centers for adults.
It sounds like a plan. Although I have to tell you, at 3, I had other things on my mind. There was a
we'll
little
talk
girl.
About that later.
There was a little girl who wanted to break my crayons, and I had to put a stop to that. But
oh my! I'll help you process that later.
And, you can see I haven't gotten over it. Angela, I want to hear a little bit about your story, though. You're an actual graduate of the division of the foster care system. So can you tell us what you endured as a young person? When did you go into the system?
Yeah, so really, I think I should have been in the foster care system a long time ago. However, I was placed in foster care when I was 16. That was after multiple teachers saw me having breakdowns during class, and also I was mute. So the way that I responded to the trauma was that I didn't speak, and that was for months on end. And so I would actually write notes to the teacher. Like if they're like, "Angela," they're calling on me to do something, I would just write a note what the answer was, or say, "No, I don't want to go up." But I wouldn't say it, I would write it. And so it took a long time for that process. And thankfully, there were also other reports over years of time. And eventually, my Spanish teacher actually sent me a note to go to the counselor's office. And initially, I didn't want to go. And over time of all these other notes from other teachers, it kind of pushed me to, I think I should go and talk to someone. But there was also, a lot of other things happening in the back of my mind, like I'm not supposed to tell anything. So if I go over here anyway, I shouldn't say anything and all the things. And so when I finally came to the counselor's office, I was with very little hope about my future, about my life, mainly also because I was homeless. Me and my family, we were homeless, and we were living in a one-room hotel with one bed, and there was 8 of us. And so majority of myself and my siblings, we were laying on the floor on a blanket, and that was my reality, with a few clothes that we couldn't afford to wash. So I'd have to, rewear a lot of clothes that wasn't clean. And so to be presented into the counselor's office in this way, and I knew a part of me knew I needed a lot of help, but also it was like, how do I vocalize this? Also, how do I be vocal again? And so I finally ended up talking to the counselor after probably 6 or 7 times of her trying to probe and get me to talk and say something. And eventually I did. And I started talking about, little by little. At first I was very vague, like, yeah, there's things going on, or I feel sad today. But over time I started to talk more about, I'm sleeping under a air conditioner, and just more and more details as the times that we spoke went on. And after that, I ended up talking with a social worker at the school. And from there, we had more of an in-depth conversation on what do I really want out of my life, and what do I really want out of this situation and what I'm sharing. And from there, that's how myself and my siblings were able to be removed from the situation we were in. But it was definitely hard to navigate, because obviously I loved my parents, but I realized that it wasn't conducive to my health or how I viewed myself to be successful, and also the well-being of my siblings. And I realized that wasn't going to be ethical or probable.
So there, you had 7 brothers and sisters. Is that what you're saying?
No, I have 5 siblings.
5?
And then
okay, so you were counting your parents. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that when you went into foster care, that the other children went as well?
Yes, except for
and
one.
You weren't able to stay together, were you?
Initially, when we got placed into foster care, we were in kinship. However, my uncle and my aunt, they were beginning to do the same things that put my siblings and I into foster care. So after a very horrific incident where my family member was abusing my siblings, I, in the middle of the act, ran out of the house and went to a neighbor and called the social worker and let them know that this wasn't going to be long term, which was also a very difficult situation, because for the longest time, I always knew myself to be a provider and a protector for my siblings, as well as like a mother figure. And I knew there would be a risk that we would be separated, and we were separated.
I can imagine. Carol Jones wrote in and says this reminded her that parents will frequently tell children not to share, like make it a point to say, don't tell anybody what's going on.
Yeah.
Did you have that same experience? Your parents sort of coaching you to not reveal?
Absolutely. We were always threatened and told, like, if we did say something that, XYZ would happen, fill in the blank. But yeah, so absolutely.
Angela, I don't know if you know Tony Viscarando, but he says he's here for you. So my
Hey,
guess
Tony.
is if you don't know Tony, you might get several marriage proposals after the show tonight.
I'm already married, so that wouldn't.
We need a little thing at the bottom that says sorry she's married.
No.
But hopefully you'll sell a few books in the process. So is the whole bullying thing, Lynne? People are writing in that actually starts at home. That's not something that you learn in school.
Right. So I'm an empty nester now. I raised 2 children, And what I saw in many homes was that the children were in charge of the home, setting the rules, and the parents weren't, especially with media and how much media they had. And then I noticed that technology was taking over my own house. So I'd like to encourage parents to be parents. Everything they're doing, their children are watching them. They need to role model kind, respectful behavior, respect their children, listen to their children. So active listening is a concept we use, and you may have heard that you put down the phone, right? Put down the phone, look at your child, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes, that you're engaging with them and listening to them, that they feel loved and they important. Screen-free zones and different kinds of things. But circling back to the bullying, so that let's see your children are mean to one another. The easiest time to stop that behavior is when they're young, right? When they're 3, 4, and 5. We don't do this in this house. And then empathy is the tool. So, I use Greg and Robin. Robin, what did it feel like when Greg took your dog away, or the other way, so that they walk in the shoes of their sibling early. And it's not just don't do that, that's wrong. That's punishment or discipline that doesn't work. Quiet, no one's mad, that you're having this peaceful conversation, that they understand that they are, creating pain and emotion. And this is something that they wouldn't want to do. For example, how would you feel if somebody took your dog away? How would you feel if you were not invited to that party? So all these prompting questions, and then listen for the answer that yes, bullying starting young, we have to take our homes back. Now, we're stuck home with the family, that's more stressful, but we need to take some time out to listen, to role model. Media is being used today as a babysitter. Okay, so we're stuck in the homes together because of COVID. After you watch that movie or the internet, turn it off and discuss what you've watched with your children so they can process it. There's a lot of reality shows and TV and shows that violence and this and that. So if you can't shut it off, but yes, you can discuss it. So what makes your children uncomfortable? What makes your children joyful and happy? What encourages your children to be kind and respectful? So make sure you have that kind of media that is modeling kind and respectful. There's so many things that you can do. It's not onerous, make it fun. But there, in the book, I have, simple tools of do this, do that, or do this or that. There's just a lot to pick from.
I'm sure there is. If you just joined us, I want you to make sure you go to www.hamiltonradio.net and look for the donation button. We are trying to keep the show on the air and Hamilton Radio afloat. And if you'd be kind enough to hit that button and make a donation of whatever you can afford, we'd really appreciate having that. And to remind you, I'm speaking with Angela Quijada-Banks, author of the Black Foster Youth Handbook, and Lynne Azarchi, author of The Empathy Advantage. So, Angela, my guess is if you were going to school in dirty clothes, you took your share of bullying along the way. My question is, when you went into the system, the foster care system, did a lot of those circumstances improve? First of all, did you go to a different school?
So initially when I got into foster care, I stayed in the school, but about a few months later, I was told that I was going to have to change schools. And I was very, very upset about that. Eventually, I was forced to change schools, and that was really heartbreaking because I had been at the school for about a couple years. And unfortunately, I didn't really feel like I was connecting to the teachers or anything. I started to isolate again. And I was only there for actually 3 days because my guardian ad litem made sure to advocate and let everyone know, including the judge, that was not going to be a great long-term situation. So I was there for 3 days, but I did notice those 3 days, I was already like self-isolating because it wasn't a for sure thing that I was going to be able to go back to my school. And so eventually, the the judge agreed with my guardian ad litem or CASA. I'm not sure what it is called in your state, but
Both.
after that, I was able to go back to my school. It took about, I think, a couple of weeks before I was actually able to go back to my school, but I wasn't at the other school anymore. And that actually was really great for me and my mental health and everything, because I had already started making friends. And as I've said previously to you, Greg, I moved over 20 times before even going into foster care. So I was starting to reconnect with other people that were my age and be able to feel like, okay, this isn't going to be another one of those times that I'm just ripped away. And yeah.
So did things improve though also in the living arrangements area? Did you have clean clothes to wear and stuff like that?
I did have clean clothes to wear. I had a lot of, I think what was difficult was the amount of clothes that I would have, because I was still moving in the foster care system. So although I was able to stay in my school, I then was moving homes, right? So it was difficult to keep up with those items, and also making sure that I was coordinating with foster parents on when I could get my items, and sometimes I wouldn't be able to get my items. So
were you sort of in that situation where you were moving from home to home with all of your stuff in like a green garbage bag?
Black trash bags, yes.
Yeah.
And again, because I had already been doing that for a lot of my life before foster care, it was just kind of like routine. Okay, I'm moving, then we get the trash bags kind of thing. So
Yeah. It was just part of what you had already known to be in your existence. So of the book that you've written, can you give us some insight? Tell us some things that we would need to know if we were in that situation.
Which situation?
If we were suddenly found ourselves in foster care, well, first of all, does it just apply to race, or do a lot of these things apply across the board?
I think a lot of these things definitely apply across the board. I think also it's important to know the history of, I would say, the foster care system. And if you're going to foster, for instance, young people of color, I think it's important to understand their particular history of, whether they're African American or indigenous or however they identify. I think it's definitely important to understand that history, so that way moving forward we can get a more clear understanding and a more holistic understanding of what is really needed to help a young person not only heal, but move forward, take accountability for what they, for instance, if you're a young person and you struggle with behavioral issues, quote unquote, and those behavioral issues stem from so many other different aspects. And from the beginning, you were talking about generational trauma and generational pain that can be taken on. So if you're a young person and you're constantly showing out and having all these behavioral problems, what would be helpful, especially if you're a young person of color, what would be helpful is to understand what happened before that. What happened with the family that the young person was taken away from. From my personal experience, what I learned is that, like, for instance, my mother, she experienced a lot of trauma, although she was economically fit for taking care of me at one point. And so she experienced a lot of trauma, and my grandmother experienced a lot of trauma. And that went all the way back to, my grandmother is originally from Mexico. But that trauma started actually with the different ways that institutional racism shows up. And so she was actually, her childhood is, she was growing up in an adobe hut in Mexico. And so, and she worked on a farm, but she was in severe poverty. And how severe poverty even affects you on a mental and physical, spiritual level. But those different things I think are really important. It's not something that's just like, oh, it's too much, it's over our head. I think if we're really looking to get some solutions, we really have to go back and we have to look at the history in order to really make and see a clearer picture on how we're going to take steps forward, especially if we're talking about long-lasting impact and solutions.
Exactly the point of that article about the young man who was murdered, by his mother was the point that the mother, you can't say that the mother actually had supporters because is murder, but when you go back and look at what that mother, endured, and you start to realize that was a mother who never had any parenting skills. Right. Grew up without any sense at all about how to parent. And now suddenly she has a baby. And of course, doesn't know what to do with it. Lynne, is your book sort of more of a method?
Well, it's, circling to the parenting skills. It's sort of a menu. Okay. You can pick, what you're comfortable with. You don't have to do all the things. I mean, I throw a lot of stuff out. Like you can read literature and stories, inculcate empathy. So instead of reading for 20 minutes, read for 15 minutes and then discuss, right? So it's not really a system, but there's just, you could do this, you could do that or the other thing. I think, parents, I mean, when we were young parents, I started reading books, but there are no courses, right? You're automatically a parent. But there are just so many things adults can do to help children in the foster system, help children who are bullied. Angela talked about, not having clean clothes. I remember something that just will warm your heart. There was a young girl we do a lot of work in the Trenton schools, and there was a young girl who wore a winter coat to school, even in the summer. So, I'm not sure if she was an immigrant or she was a child in the foster system, but the principal gave her clean clothes and figured out a way, I think intervened in the home, so this child didn't have to come to school, with a winter coat. So I guess what I want to say is it's a smorgasbord, but there's so many things adults can do to make a difference. One small act can make a difference in a child's life. And I bet Angela can remember the people who made a difference in her life. One of the best things you can do, this is sort of like a segue, but in bullying, if you're bullied or excluded, one of the best things you can do as an adult or a peer is to listen. Just listen. Sometimes you don't even have to give advice because, a lot of these situations make children feel excluded and alone. So, if you can't do 100 things, Mother Teresa said, do one. If you can't feed 100 children, then just feed one. So again, educate yourself. There's a lot of stuff online. The difference with my activities are Kidsbridge's activities and lessons are evidence-based, meaning we study them, we assess them, we analyze them. So we're just not keeping kids busy. So you need to know when you select your things to do that they are proven and effective, right? So we're all busy parents and with COVID locked home, but we want to pick things, activities, and interactive face-to-face activities that are really the best things to do with your child with limited time.
Absolutely. Angela, a listener wrote in and asked for examples of how children of color are treated differently than their white peers.
Yeah, I love that question. And I would say it's more so the internalized idea of white supremacy with young people. And one of those examples is for me when I was younger, and we can pinpoint self-esteem and how white supremacy institutionalized systems sometimes can perpetuate success a certain way, beauty a certain way. And so I'll choose beauty today. And also loving yourself.
Yes.
And loving yourself and understanding your connection to your culture. So when I was younger, I would always straighten out my hair, as you can see here. For some of us that I can see here, my hair is curly. And for a long time, I would always straighten my hair to the point that I would cry straightening my hair because, well, if I ever seen like a little wrinkle or even any kind of thing of a curl, any resemblance of a curl in my hair. And it wasn't because I necessarily thought it was ugly. It's just I internalized this idea that, you know, having straight hair was the best thing to have because that's all I really saw. One, I was in an all like white school. And so I kind of internalized different aspects of that. And secondly, I would sit there for like 12 hours trying to straighten my hair. My hair was very long at the time. And I would be crying in front of there, just crying. And I also would tell people that my hair grew naturally straight out of my head. So that was another thing that was causing me anxiety, right? Because I have to keep up with this idea that didn't exist. And so it wasn't until I traveled to the East Coast where there was more people of color that I realized that I could, you know, leave my hair out curly. But I saw so many people that were didn't look anything like me and were in spaces that I felt like I didn't belong. Even when I used to be in spelling bees and stuff, and I would constantly challenge these different things within my head. But at the same time, the way I internalized different things was very negative. And so I also talk about that in the book because I think that pinpointing different ways that we can internalize these ideas can really be, one, liberating if we change, as I said earlier, changing that narrative. And two, if supportive adults are aware of different things. And how supportive adults can be more aware, particularly in that example, is, you know, just recognizing certain things that can happen. And this is also from my experience talking to other young people and seeing the similarities specifically of young people of color, where they will completely chemically alter their hair with perms or just wear wigs to cover their hair. And they'll make up excuses like, you know, it's because I want to switch up the style or just so many other different things. But the true reality is the hatred that we have for certain features. And that's internalized
That's really rough.
of white supremacy.
That is
and,
really, really rough.
So
I was just cutting you short because we only have a couple of minutes left. And I want to make sure that people know how to get your books. So Angela, starting with you, what do people need to do to get a copy of the Black Foster Youth Handbook?
Yes, and you can learn more about that at www.blackfostercareyouthhandbook.com.
Okay, so it's the whole thing. www.blackfostercareyouthhandbook.
Yep.
All one word, right?
Yep.
All one word. www.blackfostercareyouthhandbook.com. Excellent.
Yeah.
I hope we all go out after we make a donation to Hamilton Radio and get a copy of Angela's book. And Lynn, now your book isn't out until next month, right?
Well, it came in early for some reason. I was told early November, but it's not my son bought a copy. I was so pleased. It was so nice. He was very empathetic. Anyway, to get my book, Barnes & Noble, or go to my website, empathyadvantagebook.com.
Excellent. And Lynn, 30 seconds, okay? 30 seconds. What do you do or say to your grown children if you later realize you didn't listen or were there for them?
So that's an interesting question. So first, let me start with a positive.
20 seconds.
Oh, no. Your children are listening. I mean, some things I told them I hear 10 years later. So your children are really, really listening.
Yeah.
So the last thing I'll close with is a sincere and heartfelt, I'm sorry. It's okay to be human and ask for forgiveness and not be perfect. It's okay.
Lovely. And it affirmed something I said to my daughter a while back. Anyway, thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you both here. I hope that we can have you back on again with all of your future successes. Thanks to Robin for producing. Thanks to Ruben for engineering. He's the magic man. Music provided by Angel Fire. See you next week, October 26th. Jennifer Pokepner from the Juvenile Law Center will be here. Stay healthy, everyone. Wear a mask. buy the books from these wonderful ladies, and let's make this week the best week ever. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Be safe.
Peace.
By the way, this is going to end very abruptly, so don't think you're being punished, okay?